Now we're going to try to solve this classic problem of mental causation by asking what is the causal role of consciousness. And it's a bit tricky to hang on, we need some distinctions, etc. But I hope you'll find that it's worth it. So we'll start with the distinction between how a brain pattern, so activity in our brain, can represent both qualia, conscious experiences, and represent the physical world. And when I say represent now, I use the term in a narrow sense, so it just means a consistent relation. So what it means then is that there is a consistent relation between things in the physical world and in our brain. For instance, every time I see a horse, there is this same pattern in the brain that is activated. So there's a consistent relation there. But there's also a consistent relation between this activity in my brain and a conscious experience of a horse. And there are many similar things between my conscious experience of a horse and the physical horse in the world, but there are some important differences as well. And main important difference is that qualia are simpler than physical structures. So I see this horse and there's a lot of particles coming, photons from the horse and the area around, other particles, neutrinos, etc. My conscious experience is just, well, we have this brown horse on this green background, it has this horse contour, and that's this my conscious experience of a horse, which is a much more complex physical structure. So why should we then think that that happens this way, that brains are not just connected to physical structures but also to qualia? Well, there are many examples where it will give that the brain is connected to conscious experiences will help us to make more efficient choices and inferences. Even if it's not necessarily exactly right how the world is being represented, it's very useful. So one example, when I learned how to drive a car, we were taught that the tires of the car, they have road grip, which can be used for three things: to accelerate, or to turn, or to brake. But if you do too much of it at the same time, you will use up the road grip, and the car will not be able to stay on the road. It will start sliding. For instance, if you're braking and turning the wheels at the same time, you could lose your road grip. So road grip isn't a thing that the tire has that can be used for three things, but it's a useful representation. And we can imagine other representations where non-physical things are involved. So we can start reasoning about dehumanization, or equal value, or just war, and all sorts of things that can help us guide and make choices in effective ways. Now, why believe that this is something that gives non-physical consciousness a causal role? I'll try to explain by offering three analogies that have different points that add together. And so first we'll imagine a world with robots, and that robots evolve through evolution, so they need to get resources, and they can have children robots, and depending on how well they work, they will survive. But they also have screens on their backs. So what happens in the robot brain gives an output on this screen on the back. And first it's just chaotic things happen in the robot brains and chaotic output on the screens. But after a while it gets more advanced, and you get more consistent relations to the world and more consistent sets of output on the screen. And still it's just merely shadows. What you see on the screen is just a shadow of what happens in the robot brains. But then you start having processes in the robot brains where they make choices, and some of those choices are good choices and advanced and helpful. And then after a while you'll probably see that there are patterns on the screen that are outputs from what happens in the robot brain and not out in the world. And there will be consistent patterns on the screens that are not the same as happening in the robot brains, and it's not the same as happening in the world. But it will probably be a bit similar, but simplified and seemingly useful then. So that's one analogy where we can imagine then the screens being shut off, and it would be like our non-conscious action. And you can imagine maybe there's something that where the brain has to the screen has to be on, because for it to function, and maybe consciousness has some kinds of function like that for us. But that's still not the point with this analogy. It's just imagining this connection between what happens in the physical world and that it can also be consistently related with what happens on the screen, which is then meant as an analogy for our consciousness here. But let's move on to the Lego world to add some more detail to the story. And in this analogy, we're imagining Lego beings, so beings made out of Lego bricks. That's the whole world. They have brains that are made of Lego and moving around. One can send signals and make them move their arms, and they can build Lego bricks with their arms, these Lego beings. And in this world, there are no Duplo bricks. So Duplo bricks is these bigger, simpler bricks, which look like big Lego bricks. So if you have 8 of these normal 2x4 Lego bricks, you can make one Duplo brick. So let's imagine now that these Lego beings had to create some structures in order to survive. Maybe there were some holes in the wall where they had to put some simple Lego structures, and then some more big, advanced, complex holes where they had to put in bigger and more advanced Lego structures. And we can imagine these Lego beings having a consciousness which was then consistently related to Duplo bricks, and that would make it easy for them to represent some simple structures, Duplo structures then in their brain. So maybe when they had to make a quite advanced Lego structure, they could imagine it, or they could have just the brain representing or being connected to representations of Duplo bricks. So what would be a quite complex Lego structure could be much simpler as just put 3 Duplo bricks on top of each other, or one flat and one on the side and one towards you or something. So simpler if just represented as Duplo bricks, much more advanced as Lego bricks. But then you could toy around in the Lego brain. This is how we could put some Duplo bricks together and then send signal to build a more complex Lego structure that could fit into these complex holes. So it would be a way of imagining how a process in this Lego brain could be more efficient by being consistently related to structures that did not exist in the Lego world, but what was nevertheless useful because it was simplified something that was similar enough to work in this Lego world. Okay, still everything is physical in these analogies, so now let's try and add a non-physical component. This time we're imagining that calculators that you use to do mathematical calculations, that they evolve, starting in random ways, but then picking out, selecting calculators that can do simple math equations, etc. correctly. And as they get better and better, we can ask, what is the causal role of mathematics when it comes to understanding these calculators? Because everything that happens in a calculator is physical. And still, if it's useful for survival that they function mathematically, we can ask, what is the role of mathematics then? And the role would be that these are the relations, and our mathematical entities relate in ways that are useful for how the calculators work. Even if the mathematics is itself non-physical, it's sort of it is the space of possibilities, and there are some certain relations that that shapes why you have these calculators evolving instead of others. So even if you think that maybe some mathematical structure can be understood as physical, there are certainly some some mathematical relations, etc., like the square root of -1, that you don't find as a physical structure in the world. But it could be a way that mathematics could have a causal role by being this space of possibilities. And that's the analogy we're going to use now to understand the causal role of consciousness. Because in specific choices, when you make a choice and start acting and moving, it's the brain and physical events that moves the body. But the kinds of brains and the kind of brain patterns and the way they move the bodies, they are connected to certain qualia, and it's brains with those connections that have been selected through evolution. So the idea is then that you don't have a non-physical consciousness moving the brain or the body, but there are qualia, non-physical conscious experiences, etc., that make certain ways of functioning possible for these brains, and in useful ways that can be selected by evolution. So they sort of form this space of possibilities. They shape the room within which evolution occurs. So you can, as a kind of parallel, you can see, well, why does the neuron, why is it the way it is? We can explain causally what happens within a neuron. We can say now it's this electrical process sending this signal, etc. But if we ask why is the neuron the way it is, then we would say it's evolution have selected neurons with this form and shape. They function among the different possibilities, possible ways it could have been. This is a good way for neurons to work. And in the same way, non-physical qualia has made a kind of evolution of brains possible, and that wouldn't have been there if they weren't there. So when we defined and discussed what is a cause, we saw that it's this lawful connection that makes us select something as cause. And if we think just of laws of nature, then maybe we wouldn't say that qualia are causal or causes. But if we have a wider understanding of the laws involved, we could say all sorts of metaphysical laws and include all of reality, then we will include non-physical qualia and say that they can be causes. So how does this solve the problem then of mental causation? Well, it makes us explain how consciousness can be causally efficient, have a causal role, without breaking the principle of causal closure or the conservation of energy. This principle said that if there's a physical effect, it has a sufficient physical cause at t, at that point of time, and it does. But if we look at the broader picture, we want to understand why is it these physical causes that have these effects in this time, and then we need consciousness, the non-physical consciousness, to explain how evolution has given us these brains. So the causal role of consciousness is not that non-physical consciousness is pushing or moving anything, but it's that the concrete qualia, the experiences of red and colors and smell and everything, has influenced the evolution of brains by being the possibility makers. They have shaped this space of evolution where, or this space of possibilities where evolution occurred. So shaping why this happened as opposed to something else, and thus it had this effect. This allows us then to say both on the one hand that evolution has selected consciousness because it has an effect. On the other hand, we can say that in the specific instances there is a physical cause, but we need the non-physical consciousness to explain why was it this physical cause functioning in this way. So that's a way then to maintain and say we accept all of the five claims that seem to be inconsistent, but when specified in this way and understanding the relation this way, you can maintain all of them and then solve this classical problem in the philosophy of mind.